my dears, today I will tell you the legend of Llorona, a Mexican story. I would say that it is not just a legend, it is much more than that. There are places in this world where the air feels heavier, where silence seems to stretch thin, holding its breath, as if the earth itself remembers something too terrible to speak of. Xochimilco is one of those places. By day it's a paradise, a network of shimmering canals weaving through fields of vibrant flowers and groves of ancient trees. But by night, oh by night, those same waters turn black as ink, and the air grows still, as if bracing for something unseen. The villagers here know the stories well. They've been passed down like family heirlooms, whispered by candlelight, growing more vivid with each retelling. Of all these tales, one name rises above the rest, sending shivers down even the bravest of spines. La Llorona, the weeping woman. The villagers speak of her in hushed tones, their voices trembling as if the mere mention of her name might summon her. They say she walks the banks of the canals, her white dress billowing like smoke, her cries piercing the night with a sorrow so deep it could break your heart and your mind. "Ay, mis hijos," she wails, "oh my children." But it's not the kind of cry that invites pity. No, there's something darker in it, something that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. I've heard those cries. I've seen the way the air itself seems to tremble when her voice carries through the night. That's why I'm here, sitting before you, telling this tale. Because someone needs to remember, someone needs to understand. But to understand her sorrow, her rage, her eternal curse, we must go back to a time long before she became La Llorona, to a time when she was still Maria. Maria, the woman who lived, loved, and lost everything. Maria was born in a small village, nestled between rolling hills and the vast waters of Lake Texcoco. Her family was poor, laboring day and night to scratch a living from the unforgiving land. But Maria was rich in beauty, and her beauty was her gift and her curse. They said her eyes were like two stars fallen from the heavens, her smile warm enough to melt even the coldest heart. Wherever she went, men stopped to stare, and women whispered behind her back. Though not always with malice, she was radiant, and her light seemed to make even the mundane sparkle. But Maria wasn't content with admiration. She wanted more. Her heart ached for something greater than the life her family could offer, a life of toil and simplicity. She dreamed of love, yes, but not just any love. She wanted a love that burned brighter than the sun, that could lift her out of her humble existence and into a world of passion and promise. And then, one fateful day, he arrived. Don Alejandro was everything the men of her village were not. He was tall, handsome, and elegant, his clothes speaking of wealth and his manners of refinement. He rode into the village on a horse as white as the clouds, his presence commanding attention without him needing to utter a word. When he saw Maria, he stopped, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. From that day forward, Don Alejandro pursued Maria with a fervor that left her breathless. He brought her gifts, jewels, silks, and perfumes, and whispered promises of a life she had only dreamed of. Maria, against her better judgment, fell for him. Perhaps it was his charm, or perhaps it was the promise of escape from her ordinary life. Whatever it was, she gave herself to him completely. Their love was passionate, consuming, and for a time it seemed Maria had found her happily ever after. She bore him 2 children, a boy and a girl, and she loved them with a fierceness that only a mother can understand. Her days were filled with laughter and the sweet chaos of family life. Her nights were spent dreaming of the future they would build together. But happiness, as I have learned in my years as a pastor and a man who has faced the supernatural, is often fleeting. And in Maria's case, it was heartbreakingly so. Don Alejandro began to change. At first, it was small, a distant look in his eyes, a stiffness in his embraces. Then came the absences, longer and more frequent. He claimed to have business in the city, but Maria began to suspect otherwise. Her suspicions were confirmed one fateful evening when she followed him into town. She saw him laughing with another woman, a Spanish noblewoman, dressed in the finest silks. The way he looked at her, the way he touched her hand, it was a look Maria knew all too well. It was the look of love. When Don Alejandro returned to the village, Maria confronted him. He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at her with a coldness that cut deeper than any blade. He told her their time together had been a mistake, a fleeting indulgence. Worse, he declared he would take their children away to live with him and his new wife. Maria, he said, was unfit to raise them. She was a peasant, a nobody. Maria's world crumbled. The love she had sacrificed everything for was gone, replaced by betrayal and humiliation. But more than anything, the thought of losing her children consumed her. They were her life, her reason for existing. Without them, she was nothing. It was in that moment that something inside her broke. The vibrant, radiant Maria the villagers had once known was gone. What remained was a woman hollowed out by pain, her heart filled with a darkness that would soon spill out and engulf everything she held dear. But that, my friends, is only the beginning of Maria's descent. If you think the story is dark now, brace yourself. For the sorrow of La Llorona runs deeper than the darkest waters, and her curse is a warning to us all. The days following Don Alejandro's betrayal were a blur of anguish for Maria. She wandered the village like a ghost, her once bright eyes dulled, her laughter a distant memory. People whispered as she passed, their pity cutting deeper than their gossip ever had. The vibrant woman they once envied had become a hollow shell, consumed by sorrow and rage. Her children, too young to understand their mother's despair, tried to comfort her in their innocent ways. But every time they laughed or played, Maria's heart twisted painfully. They were a constant reminder of the man who had shattered her world, a man who was now planning to take them away. The days turned to weeks, and Maria's despair curdled into something darker. At night, she would sit by the riverbank, staring into the water's black depths as if seeking answers, or perhaps an escape. The villagers noticed her strange behavior. Some said they saw her talking to the wind, her hands clutching the rosary as though it might banish the demons haunting her mind. Others claimed they heard her weeping, her cries blending with the mournful rustle of the reeds. Then, one fateful evening, the darkness in Maria's heart reached its breaking point. It was a moonlit night, the kind where the world feels both eerily still and alive with unseen energy. Maria, dressed in a simple white gown, her long black hair cascading down her back, took her children by the hand. "Let's go to the river," she whispered, her voice trembling with a strange mix of love and resolve. The children, trusting their mother completely, followed without question. The river was quiet, its surface reflecting the silver glow of the moon. Maria knelt by the water, holding her children close. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to them, her words a blend of lullaby and prayer. "I love you," she murmured over and over, as if trying to etch the words into their souls. Then, in a moment of madness, whether fueled by despair, vengeance, or a warped sense of protection, Maria did the unthinkable. She pushed her children into the river's icy depths. The cries of her son and daughter shattered the stillness of the night, piercing Maria's heart like a blade. But it was too late. The current swept them away, their small hands reaching for her, their voices calling out for a mother who had betrayed them. As the ripples in the water faded, so too did Maria's madness. The weight of what she had done crashed over her like a tidal wave. She screamed, her voice raw and inhuman, and threw herself into the river, hoping to join her children in death. But the river, as if repulsed by her sin, rejected her. It spat her back onto the muddy bank, leaving her alive to face the unbearable truth. From that moment on, Maria was no longer merely a woman. She became a legend, and a curse. The villagers found her body days later, lifeless and pale, her face frozen in an expression of unspeakable grief. They buried her in unmarked ground, murmuring prayers for her soul. But peace would not come for Maria. It was said that on the very night of her burial, the first cries of La Llorona were heard. "Ay, mis hijos!" Her wail echoed through the village, chilling the blood of all who heard it. "Oh, my children!" She wandered the riverbanks, her ghostly figure draped in the same white gown she wore in life. Her cries were filled with an anguish so profound that it seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth. The villagers who dared to venture near the river at night reported seeing her silhouette, her flowing white gown illuminated by an otherworldly glow. Her long black hair hung like a shroud over her face, hiding the torment etched into her spectral features. It wasn't long before people began to notice strange occurrences. Livestock went missing, their tracks leading to the water's edge, where they vanished entirely. Children claimed to see a beautiful woman calling to them from the riverbanks, her voice soft and inviting. Some, entranced by her sorrowful cries, wandered too close and were never seen again. Fear took hold of the village. Parents warned their children to stay indoors after dark. Stories spread of men who, after hearing her cries, fell ill or were found dead, with expressions of sheer terror frozen on their faces. La Llorona's legend grew, her presence transcending the boundaries of Xochimilco, her cries haunting rivers and lakes across the land. But her curse was not born only of sorrow. It was steeped in rage. She sought not just her lost children, but vengeance against the living, her twisted mind unable to distinguish between her victims and her beloved offspring. They say she roams the waterways, forever searching for her children and punishing those who remind her of her loss. I remember the first time I encountered La Llorona. It was years after I had begun my work as an exorcist, traveling to places where the veil between the physical and the spiritual worlds was thinnest. I had been called to Xochimilco by the village elder, who described a growing unease among the people. Children refused to sleep, claiming to hear a woman crying outside their windows. Men avoided the river entirely, saying they felt eyes watching them from the reeds. On my second night there, I heard it, her cry. "Ay, mis hijos." The sound was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not merely a wail, but a wound, raw and festering, cutting through the air with a force that seemed to pull at the very fibers of my soul. I followed the sound, against my better judgment, clutching my rosary tightly. As I approached the river, the air grew colder, and the moonlight seemed to dim, as if the night itself recoiled from her presence. And then I saw her. She stood at the water's edge, her back to me, her figure impossibly still. Her white dress shimmered faintly, as though woven from moonlight. Her hair cascaded down her back like a veil of shadows. For a moment I hesitated, torn between fear and a strange, inexplicable sorrow. "Maria!" I called, though I hadn't meant to speak aloud. At the sound of my voice, she turned. Her face was obscured, but her eyes burned with an otherworldly light, pools of sorrow and rage so intense they threatened to consume me. She moved closer, her steps silent, her cries growing louder, echoing in my mind as if they were my own thoughts. I prayed harder than I ever had, invoking the name of God and holding up my crucifix. Her approach slowed, and for a brief moment her cries softened, as if my prayer had touched some buried remnant of humanity within her. Then, with a scream that shattered the stillness, she vanished, leaving me trembling by the riverbank. Since that night, I have encountered La Llorona many times in my travels, each meeting as harrowing as the last. She is not a spirit that can be banished or appeased. She is a reminder, a warning of what happens when love turns to obsession, when grief consumes a soul so completely that it leaves no room for redemption. To this day, her cries echo across the waterways of Mexico and beyond. Some say she is a cautionary tale, meant to keep children away from the dangers of rivers at night. Others believe she is real, her spirit trapped in a cycle of endless torment. I can tell you this with certainty. La Llorona is not just a story. I have felt her presence, heard her cries, seen the devastation she leaves in her wake. If you ever hear her wail, do not look for her. Do not call out. Run. Run and pray that her sorrow does not find you. For her curse is eternal, her pain unending, and in the stillness of the night, by the edge of the water, she waits, always watching, always searching, always crying.